The People of the Crater, Part 2, by Andre Norton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Greg Marguerite. The People of the Crater, Part 2, by Andre Norton. Chapter 7. Kepta's Trap. Thrala arose to face them. Forgetting the disguise he wore, Garin drew back, chilled by her icy demeanor. But Dantan sprang forward and caught her in his arms. She struggled madly until she saw the face beneath her captor's hood, and then she gave a cry of delight and her arms were about his neck. "Dantan!" He smiled. "Even so, but it's the Outlander's doing." She came to the American, studying his face. "Outlander? So cold a name is not for you, when you have served us so." She offered him her hands, and he raised them to his lips. "And how are you named?" Dantan laughed. "Thus the eternal curiosity of women." "Garin." "Garin," she repeated. "How like—" A faint rose glowed beneath her pearl flesh. Dantan's hand fell lightly upon his rescuer's shoulder. "Indeed, he is like him. From this day let him bear that other's name, Garin, son of light." "Why not?" she returned calmly. "After all, the reward which might have been Garin's may be his. Tell him the story of his namesake when we are again in the caverns." Dantan was interrupted by a frightened squeak from the Ana. Then came a mocking voice. "So the prey has entered the trap of its own will. How many hunters may boast the same?" Kepta leaned against the door, the light of vicious mischief dancing in his eyes. Garin dropped his cloak to the floor, but Dantan must have read what was in the flyer's mind, for he caught him by the arm. "On your life, touch him not." "So you have learned that much wisdom while you have dwelt among us, Dantan. Would that Thrala had done the same. But fair women find me weak." He eyed her proud body in a way that would have sent Garin at his throat had Dantan not held him. "So shall Thrala have a second chance. How would you like to see these men in the room of instruments, lady?" "I do not fear you," she returned. "Thran once made a prophecy, and he never spoke idly. We shall win free." "That will be as fate would have it. Meanwhile I leave you to each other." He whipped around the door and slammed it behind him. They heard the grating of the bar he slid into place. Then his footsteps died away. "There goes evil," murmured Thrala softly. "Perhaps it would have been better if Garin had killed him as he thought to do. We must get away." Garin drew the rod from his belt. The green light motes gathered and clung about its polished length. "Touch not the door," Thrala advised. "Only its hinges." Beneath the tip of the rod the stone became spongy and flaked away. Dantan and the flyer caught the door and eased it to the floor. With one quick movement Thrala caught up Garin's cloak and swirled it about her, hiding the glitter of her gem-encrusted robe. There was a curious, cold lifelessness about the air of the corridor, the light-bearing motes vanishing as if blown out. "Hurry," the daughter urged. "Kepta is withdrawing the living light so that we will have to wander in the dark." When they reached the end of the hall the light was quite gone, and Garin bruised his hands against the stone portcullis which had been lowered. From somewhere on the other side of the barrier came rippling laughter. "Oh, Outlander," called Kepta mockingly. "You will get through easily enough when you remember your weapon, but the dark you cannot conquer so easily, nor that which runs the halls." Garin was already busy with the rod. Within 5 minutes their way was clear again, but Thrala stopped them when they would have gone through. "Kepta has loosed the hunters." "The hunters?" "The Morgels and others," explained Dantan. "The Black Ones have withdrawn and only death comes this way, and the Morgels see in the dark." "So does the Ana." "Well thought of," agreed the son of the Ancient Ones. "It will lead us out." As if in answer there came a tug at Garin's belt. Reaching back he caught Thrala's hand and knew that she had taken Dantan's. So linked they crossed the guardroom. Then the Ana paused for a long time, as if listening. There was nothing to see but the darkness which hung about them like the smothering folds of a curtain. "Something follows us," whispered Dantan. "Nothing to fear," stated Thrala. "It dare not attack. It is, I think, of Kepta's fashioning, and that which has not true life dreads death above all things. It is going." There came sounds of something crawling slowly away. "Kepta will not try that again," continued the Daughter disdainfully. "He knew that his monstrosities would not attack. Only in the light are they to be dreaded, and then only because of the horror of their forms." Again the Ana tugged at its master's belt. They shuffled into the narrow passage beyond, but there remained the sense of things about them in the dark, things which Thrala continued to insist were harmless, and yet which filled Garin with loathing. Then they entered the far corridor into which led the three halls and which ended in the morgel pit. Here, Garin believed, was the greatest danger from the morgels. The Ana stopped short, dropping back against Garin's thigh. In the blackness appeared two yellow disks, sparks of saffron in their depths. Garin thrust the rod into Thrala's hands. "What do you?" she demanded. "I'm going to clear the way. It's too dark to use the rod against moving creatures." He flung the words over his shoulder as he moved toward the unwinking eyes. Chapter 8. Escape from the Caves. Keeping his eyes upon those soulless yellow disks, Garin snatched off his hood, wadding it into a ball. Then he sprang. His fingers slipped on smooth hide, sharp fangs ripped his forearm, blunt nails scraped his ribs. A foul breath puffed into his face and warm slaver trickled down his neck and chest. But his plan succeeded. The cap was wedged into the morgel's throat and the beast was slowly choking. Blood dripped from the flyer's torn flesh, but he held on grimly until he saw the light fade from those yellow eyes. The dying morgel made a last mad plunge for freedom, dragging his attacker along the rock floor. Then Garin felt the heaving body rest limply against his own. He staggered against the wall, panting. "Garin!" cried Thrala. Her questioning hand touched his shoulder and crept to his face. "Is it well with you?" "Yes," he panted. "Let us go on." Thrala's fingers had lingered on his arm, and now she walked beside him, her cloak making whispering sounds as it brushed against the wall and floor. "Wait," she cautioned suddenly. "The morgel pit." Dantan slipped by them. "I will try the door." In a moment he was back. "It is open," he whispered. "Kepta believes," mused Thrala, "that we will keep to the safety of the gallery. Therefore let us go through the pit. The morgels will be gone to better hunting grounds." Through the pit they went. A choking stench arose from underfoot, and they trod very carefully. They climbed the stairs on the far side, unchallenged, Dantan leading. "The rod here, Garin," he called. "This door is barred." Garin pressed the weapon into the other's hand and leaned against the rock. He was sick and dizzy. The long, deep wounds on his arm and shoulder were stiffening and ached with a biting throb. When they went on, he panted with effort. They still moved in darkness, and his distress passed unnoticed. "This is wrong," he muttered, half to himself. We go too easily." And he was answered out of the blackness. "Well noted, outlander. But you go free for the moment, as does Thrala and Dantan. Our full accounting is not yet. And now, farewell, until we meet again in the Hall of Thrones. I could find it in me to applaud your courage, outlander. Perhaps you will come to serve me yet." Garin turned and threw himself toward the voice, bringing up with bruising force against rock wall. Kepta laughed. "Not with the skill of a bull tanned will you capture me." His second laugh was cut cleanly off, as if a door had been closed. In silence the three hurried up the ramp. Then, as through a curtain, they came into the light of Tav. Thrala let fall her drab cloak, stood with arms outstretched in the craterland. Her sparkling robe sheathed her in glory, and she sang softly, wrapped in her own delight. Then Dantan put his arm about her. She clung to him, staring about as might a beauty bewildered child. Garin wondered dully how he would be able to make the journey back to the Caverns when his arm and shoulder were eaten with a consuming fire. The Ana crept closer to him, peering into his white face. They were aroused by a howl from the caves. Thrala cried out, and Dandtan answered her unspoken question. "They have set the Morgels on our trail." The howl from the caves was echoed from the forest. Morgels before and behind them. Garin might set himself against one, Dandtan another, and Thrala could defend herself with the rod, but in the end the pack would kill them. "We shall claim protection from the Gibi of the cliff. By the law they must give us aid," said Thrala, as, turning up her long robe, she began to run lightly. Garin picked up her cloak and drew it across his shoulder to hide his welts. When he could no longer hold her pace, she must not guess the reason for his falling behind. Of that flight through the forest the flyer afterward remembered little. At last the gurgle of water broke upon his pounding ears as he stumbled along a good 10 lengths behind his companions. They had come to the edge of the wood along the banks of the river. Without hesitation Thrala and Dandtan plunged into the oily flood, swimming easily for the other side. Garin dropped the cloak, wondering if, once he stepped into the yellow stream, he would ever be able to struggle out again. Already the Ana was in, paddling in circles near the shore and pleading with him to follow. Wearily Garin waded out. The water, which washed the blood and sweat from his aching body, was faintly brackish and stung his wounds to life. He could not fight the sluggish current, and it bore him downstream, well away from where the others landed. But at last he managed to win free, crawling out near where a smaller stream joined the river. There he lay panting face down upon the moss, and there they found him, water dripping from his bedraggled finery, the Ana stroking his muddied hair. Thrala cried out with concern and pillowed his head on her knees, while Dandtan examined his wounds. "Why did you not tell us?" demanded Thrala. He did not try to answer, content to lie there, her arms supporting him. Dandtan disappeared into the forest, returning soon, his hands filled with a mass of crushed leaves. With these he plastered Garin's wounds. "You'd better go on," Garin warned. Dandtan shook his head. "The Morgels cannot swim. If they cross they must go to the bridge, and that is half the crater away." The Ana dropped into their midst, its small hands filled with clusters of purple fruit. And so they feasted, Garin at ease on a fern couch, accepting food from Thrala's hand. There seemed to be some virtue in Dandtan's leaf plaster, for after a short rest Garin was able to get to his feet with no more than a twinge or two in his wounds. But they started on at a more sober pace. Through mossy glens and sunlit glades where strange flowers made perfume the trail led. The stream they followed branched twice before, on the edge of meadowland, they struck away from the guiding water toward the crater wall. Suddenly Thrala threw back her head and gave a shrill, sweet whistle. Out of the air dropped a yellow and black insect as large as a hawk. Twice it circled her head and then perched itself on her outstretched wrist. Its swollen body was jet black, its curving legs, 3 to a side, chrome yellow. The round head ended in a sharp beak, and it had large, many-faceted eyes. The wings, which lazily tested the air, were black and touched with gold. Thrala rubbed the round head while the insect nuzzled affectionately at her cheek. Then she held out her wrist again, and it was gone. "We shall be expected now, and may pass unmolested." Shortly they became aware of a murmuring sound. The crater wall loomed ahead, dwarfing the trees at its base. "There is the city of the Gibi," remarked Dandtan. Clinging to the rock were the towers and turrets of many 8-sided cells. "They are preparing for the Mists," observed Thrala. "We shall have company on our journey to the Caverns." They passed the trees and reached the foot of the wax skyscrapers which towered dizzily above their heads. A great cloud of Gibi hovered about them. Garin felt the soft brush of their wings against his body, and they crowded each other jealously to be near Thrala. The soft hush-hush of their wings filled the clearing as one large Gibi of outstanding beauty approached. The commoners fluttered off, and Thrala greeted the queen of the cells as an equal. Then she turned to her companions with the information the Gibi Queen had to offer. "We are just in time. Tomorrow the Gibi leave. The Morgels have crossed the river and are out of control. Instead of hunting us, they have gone to ravage the forest lands. All Tav has been warned against them, but they may be caught by the mist and so destroyed. We are to rest in the cliff hollows, and one shall come for us when it is time to leave." The Gibi withdrew to the cell combs after conducting their guests to the rock hollows. Chapter 9. Days of Preparation. Garin was awakened by a loud murmuring. Dandtan knelt beside him. "We must go. Even now the Gibi seal the last of the cells." They ate hurriedly of cakes of grain and honey, and as they feasted the Queen again visited them. The first of the swarm were already winging eastward. With the Gibi nation hanging like a storm cloud above them, the three started off across the meadow. The purple-blue haze was thickening, and here and there curious formations like the dust devils of the desert arose and danced and disappeared again. The tropic heat of Tav increased. It was as if the ground itself were steaming. "The mists draw close. We must hurry," panted Dandtan. They traversed the tongue of forest which bordered the meadow and came to the central plain of Tav. There was a brooding stillness there. The Ana perched on Garin's shoulders shivered. Their walk became a trot. The Gibi bunched together. Once Thrala caught her breath in a half sob. "They are flying slowly because of us. And it's so far." "Look!" Dandtan pointed at the plain. "The Morgels." The Morgel pack, driven by fear, ran in leaping bounds. They passed within 100 yards of the three, yet did not turn from their course, though several snarled at them. "They are already dead," observed Dandtan. "There is no time for them to reach the shelter of the caves." Splashing through a shallow brook, the three began to run. For the first time Thrala faltered and broke pace. Garin thrust the Ana into Dandtan's arms, and before she could protest, swept the girl into his arms. The haze was denser now, setting upon them as a curtain. Black hair, finer than silk, whipped across Garin's throat. Thrala's head was on his shoulder. Her heaving breasts arched as she gasped the sultry air. "They keep watch!" shouted Dandtan. Piercing the gloom were pinpoints of light. A dark shape grazed Garin's head, one of the Gibi Queen's guards. Then abruptly they stumbled into a throng of the Folk, one of whom reached for Thrala with a crooning cry. It was Sera welcoming her mistress. Thrala was borne away by the women, leaving Garin with a feeling of desolation. "The mists, outlander!" It was Urg, pointing toward the cavern mouth. Two of the Folk swung their weight on a lever. Across the opening a sheet of crystal clicked into place. The caverns were sealed. The haze was now inky black outside, and billows of it beat against the protecting barrier. It might have been midnight of the blackest starless night. "So will it be for 40 days. What is without dies," said Urg. "Then we have 40 days in which to prepare." Garin spoke his thought aloud. Dandtan's keen face lightened. "Well said, Garin. 40 days before Kepta may seek us. And we have much to do. But first our respects to the Lord of the Folk." Together they went to the Hall of Thrones, where, when he saw Dandtan, Trar arose and held out his jade-tipped rod of office. The son of the Ancient Ones touched it. "Hail, Dweller in the Light, and outlander who has fulfilled the promise of Thran. Thrala is once more within the caverns. Now send you to dust this black throne." Garin, nothing loath, drew the destroying rod from his belt, but Dandtan shook his head. "The time is not yet, Trar. Kepta must finish the pattern he began. 40 days have we, and then the Black Ones come." Trar considered thoughtfully. "So that be the way of it. Thran did not see another war. But he saw an end to Kepta." Trar straightened as if some burden had rolled from his thin shoulders. "Well do you speak, Lord. When there is one to sit upon the Rose Throne, what have we to fear? Listen, O ye Folk, the light has returned to the caverns." His cry was echoed by the gathering of the Folk. "And now, Lord," he turned to Dandtan with deference, "what are your commands?" For the space of one sleep I shall enter the chamber of renewing with this outlander, who is no longer an outlander, but one Garin, accepted by the Daughter according to the law. And while we rest, let all be made ready. The Dweller in the Light has spoken." Trar himself escorted them from the hall. They came through many winding passages to a deep pool of water, in the depths of which lurked odd purple shadows. Dandtan stripped and plunged in, Garin following his example. The water was tinglingly alive, and they did not linger in it long. From it they went to a bubble room such as the one Garin had rested in after the bath of light rays, and on the cushions in its center stretched their tired bodies. When Garin awoke he experienced the same exaltation he had felt before. Dandtan regarded him with a smile. "Now to work," he said, as he reached out to press a knob set in the wall. Two of the Folk appeared, bringing with them clean trappings. After they dressed and broke their fast, Dandtan started for the laboratories. Garin would have gone with him, but Sera intercepted them. "There is one who would speak with Lord Garin." Dandtan laughed. "Go," he ordered the American. "Thrala's commands may not be slighted." The Hall of Women was deserted, and the corridor beyond, roofed and walled with slabs of rose-shot crystal, was as empty. Sera drew aside a golden curtain, and they were in the audience chamber of the Daughter. A semicircular dais of the clearest crystal, heaped with rose and gold cushions, faced them. Before it a fountain in the form of a flower nodding on a curved stem sent a spray of water into a shallow basin. The walls of the room were divided into alcoves by marble pillars, each one curved in semblance of a fern frond. From the domed ceiling, on chains of twisted gold, 7 lamps, each wrought from a single yellow sapphire, gave soft light. The floor was a mosaic of gold and crystal. 2 small Anas, who had been playing among the cushions, pattered up to exchange greetings with Garin's, but of the mistress of the chamber there was no sign. Garin turned to Sera, but before he could phrase his question she asked mockingly, "Who is the Lord Garin that he can not wait with patience?" But she left in search of the Daughter. Garin glanced uneasily about the room. This jeweled chamber was no place for him. He had started toward the door when Thrala stepped within. "Greetings to the Daughter." His voice sounded formal and cold, even to himself. Her hands, which had been outheld in welcome, dropped to her sides. A ghost of a frown dimmed her beauty. "Greetings, Garin," she returned slowly. "You sent for me?" He prompted, eager to escape from this jewel box and the unattainable treasure it held. "Yes." The coldness of her tone was an order of exile. "I would know how you fared, and whether your wounds yet troubled you." He looked down at his own smooth flesh, cleanly healed by the wisdom of the Folk. "I am myself again, and eager to be at such work as Dandtan can find for me." Her robe seemed to hiss across the floor as she turned upon him. "Then go," she ordered. "Go quickly." And blindly he obeyed. She had spoken as if to a servant, one whom she could summon and dismiss by whim. Even if Dandtan held her love, she might have extended him her friendship, but he knew within him that friendship would be a poor crumb beside the feast his pulses pounded for. There was a pattering of feet behind him. So she would call him back. His pride sent him on, but it was Sera, her head thrust forward until she truly resembled a reptile. "Fool! Morgel!" she spat. "Even the Black Ones did not treat her so. Get you out of the place of women, lest they divide your skin among them." Garin broke free, not heeding her torrent of reproach. Then he seized upon one of the Folk as a guide and sought the laboratories. Far beneath the surface of Tav, where the light motes shone ghostly in the gloom, they came into a place of ceaseless activity, where there were tables crowded with instruments, coils of glass and metal tubing, and other equipment and supplies. These were the focusing point for ceaseless streams of the Folk. On a platform at the far end, Garin saw the tall son of the Ancient Ones working on a framework of metal and shining crystal. He glanced up as Garin joined him. "You are late," he accused, "but your excuse is a good one. Now get you to work. Hold this here, and here while I fasten these clamps." So Garin became extra hands and feet for Dandtan, and they worked feverishly to build against the lifting of the mists. There was no day or night in the laboratories. They worked steadily, without rest, and without feeling fatigue. Twice they went to the Chamber of Renewing, but except for these trips to the upper ways, they were not out of the laboratories through all those days. Of Thrala there was no sign, nor did anyone speak of her. The cavern dwellers were depending upon two defenses: an evil green liquid to be thrown in frail glass globes, and a screen charged with energy. Shortly before the lifting of the mists, these arms were transported to the entrance and installed there. Dandtan and Garin made a last inspection. Kepta makes the mistake of underrating his enemies, Dandtan reflected, feeling the edge of the screen carelessly. When I was captured, on the day my people died, I was sent to the Black Ones' laboratories so that their seekers after knowledge might learn the secrets of the Ancient Ones. But I proved a better pupil than teacher, and I discovered the defense against the Black Fire. After I had learned that, Kepta grew impatient with my supposed stupidity, and tried to use me to force Thrala to his will. For that, as for other things, shall he pay, and the paying will not be in coin of his own striking. Let us think of that." He turned to greet Urg and Trar and the other leaders of the folk who had approached unnoticed. Among them stood Thrala, her gaze fixed upon the crystal wall between them and the thinning mist. She noticed Garin no more than she did the Anas playing with her train and the women whispering behind her. But Garin stepped back into the shadows, and what he saw was not weapons of war, but cloudy black hair and graceful white limbs veiled in splendor. Urg and one of the other chieftains bore down upon the door lever. With a protesting squeak, the glass wall disappeared into the rock. The green of Tav beckoned them out to walk in its freshness. It was renewed with lusty life, but in all that expanse of meadow and forest there was a strange stillness. "Post sentries," ordered Dandtan. "The Black Ones will come soon." He beckoned Garin forward as he spoke to Thrala. "Let us go to the Hall of Thrones." But the daughter did not answer his smile. "It is not meet that we should spend time in idle talk. Let us go instead to call upon the help of those who have gone before us." So speaking, she darted a glance at Garin, as chill as the Arctic lands beyond the tip of Tav, and then swept away with Sera bearing her train. Dandtan stared at Garin. "What has happened between you two?" The flyer shook his head. I don't know. No man is born with an understanding of women." "But she is angered with you. What has happened?" For a moment Garin was tempted to tell the truth, that he dared not break any barrier she chose to raise, lest he seize what in honor was none of his. But he shook his head mutely. Neither of them saw Thrala again until death entered the caverns. Chapter 10. Battle and Victory. Garin stood with Dandtan looking out into the plain of Tav. Some distance away were two slender steel-tipped towers, which were in reality but hollow tubes filled with the black fire. Before these, dark-clad figures were busy. "They seem to believe us already defeated. Let them think so," commented Dandtan, touching the screen they had erected before the cavern entrance. As he spoke, Kepta swaggered through the tall grass to call a greeting. "Ho, rock dweller, I would speak with you." Dandtan edged around the screen, Garin a pace behind. "I see you, Kepta." "Good. I trust that your ears will serve you as well as your eyes. These are my terms. Give Thrala to me to dwell in my chamber, and the Outlander to provide sport for my captains. Make no resistance, but throw open the caverns so that I may take my rightful place in the Hall of Thrones. Do this, and we shall be at peace." And this is our reply. Dandtan stood unmovingly before the screen. "Return to the caves. Break down the bridge between your land and ours. Let no Black One come hither again, ever." Kepta laughed. "So that be the way of it. Then this shall we do. Take Thrala to be mine for a space, and then go to my captains." Garin hurled himself forward, felt Kepta's lips mash beneath his fist. His fingers were closing about the other's throat as Dantan, who was trying to pull him away from his prey, shouted a warning. "Watch out!" A morgel had leapt from the grass, its teeth snapping about Garin's wrist, forcing him to drop Kepta. Then Dantan laid it senseless by a sharp blow with his belt. On hands and knees Kepta crawled back to his men. The lower part of his face was a red and dripping smear. He screamed an order with savage fury. Dantan drew the still raging flyer behind the screen. "Be a little prudent," he panted. "Kepta can be dealt with in other ways than bare hands." The towers were swinging their tips toward the entrance. Dantan ordered the screen wedged tightly into place. Outside, the morgel Dantan had stunned got groggily to its feet. When it had limped half the distance back to its master, Kepta gave the order to fire. The broad beam of black light from the tip of the nearest tower caught the beast head on. There was a chilling scream of agony, and where the morgel had stood, gray ashes drifted on the wind. A hideous crackling arose as the black beam struck the screen. Green grass beneath seared away, leaving only parched earth and naked blue soil. Those within the cavern crouched behind their frail protection, half blinded by the light from the seared grass, coughing from the chemical-ridden fumes which curled about the cracks of the rock. Then the beam faded out. Thin smoke plumed from the tips of the towers. Steam arose from the blackened ground. Dantan drew a deep breath. "It held!" he cried, betraying at last the fear which had ridden him. Men of the Folk dragged engines of tubing before the screen, while others brought forth the globes of green liquid. Dantan stood aside, as if this matter were the business of the Folk alone, and Garin recalled that the Ancient Ones were opposed to the taking of life. Trar was in command now. At his orders, the globes were posed on spoon-shaped holders. Loopholes in the screen clicked open. Trar brought down his hand in signal. The globes arose lazily, sliding through the loopholes and floating out toward the towers. One, aimed short, struck the ground where the fire had burned it bare, and broke. The liquid came forth, sluggishly forming a gray-green gas as the air struck it. Another spiral of gas arose almost at the foot of one of the towers, and then another, and another. There quickly followed a tortured screaming, which soon dwindled to a weak yammering. They could see shapes, no longer human or animal, staggering about in the fog. Dantan turned away, his face white with horror. Garin's hands were over his ears to shut out that crying. At last it was quiet. There was no more movement by the towers. Urg placed a sphere of rosy light upon the nearest machine and flipped it out into the camp of the enemy. As if it were a magnet, it drew the green tendrils of gas to leave the air clear. Here and there lay shrunken, livid shapes, the towers brooding over them. One of the Folk burst into their midst, a woman of Thrala's following. "Haste!" she clawed at Garin. "Kepta takes Thrala!" She ran wildly back the way she had come, with the American pounding at her heels. They burst into the Hall of Thrones and saw a struggling group before the dais. Garin heard someone howl like an animal, became aware the sound came from his own throat. For the second time his fist found its mark on Kepta's face. With a shriek of rage the Black One threw Thrala from him and sprang at Garin, his nails tearing gashes in the flyer's face. Twice the American twisted free and sent bone-crunching blows into the other's ribs. Then he got the grip he wanted, and his fingers closed around Kepta's throat. In spite of the Black One's struggles he held on until a limp body rolled beneath him. Panting, the American pulled himself up from the blood-stained floor and grabbed the arm of the jade throne for support. "Garin!" Thrala's arms were about him, her pitying fingers on his wounds, and in that moment he forgot Dantan, forgot everything he had steeled himself to remember. She was in his arms, and his mouth sought hers possessively. Nor was she unresponsive, but yielded as a flower yields to the wind. "Garin," she whispered softly. Then, almost shyly, she broke from his hold. Beyond her stood Dantan, his face white, his mouth tight. Garin remembered, and a little mad with pain and longing he dropped his eyes, trying not to see the loveliness which was Thrala. "So, Outlander, Thrala flies to your arms." Garin whirled about. Kepta was hunched on the broad seat of the jet throne. "No, I am not dead, Outlander, nor shall you kill me as you think to do. I go now, but I shall return. We have met and hated, fought and died before, you and I. You were a certain Garin, Marshal of the air fleet of Yu-Lac on a vanished world, and I was Lord of Koom. That was in the days before the Ancient Ones pioneered space. You and I and Thrala, we are bound together, and even fate cannot break those bonds. Farewell, Garin. And do you, Thrala, remember the ending of that other Garin? It was not an easy one. With a last malicious chuckle, he leaned back in the throne. His battered body slumped. Then the sharp lines of the throne blurred. It shimmered in the light. Abruptly then both it and its occupant were gone. They were staring at empty space above which loomed the rose throne of the Ancient Ones. "He spoke true," murmured Thrala. "We have had other lives, other meetings. So will we meet again. But for the present he returns to the darkness which sent him forth. It is finished." Without warning, a low rumbling filled the cavern. The walls rocked and swayed. Lizard and human, they huddled together until the swaying stopped. Finally a runner appeared with news that one of the Gibi had ventured forth and discovered that the Caves of Darkness had been sealed by an underground quake. The menace of the Black Ones was definitely at an end. Chapter 11. Thrala's Mate. Although there were falls of rock within the caverns and some of the passages were closed, few of the folk suffered injury. Gibi scouts reported that the land about the entrance to the caves had sunk, and that the river of gold thrown out of its bed was fast filling this basin to form a lake. As far as they could discover, none of the Black Ones had survived the battle and the sealing of the caves, but they could not be sure that there was not a handful of outlaws somewhere within the confines of Tav. The crater itself was changed. A series of raw hills had appeared in the central plain. The pool of boiling mud had vanished, and trees in the forest lay flat, as if cut by a giant scythe. Upon their return to the cliff city, the Gibi found most of their wax skyscrapers in ruins, but they set about rebuilding without complaint. The squirrel farmers emerged from their burrows and were again busy in the fields. Garin felt out of place in all the activity that filled the caverns. More than ever he was the outlander with no true roots in Tav. Restlessly he explored the caverns, spending many hours in the Place of Ancestors, where he studied those men of the outer worlds who had preceded him into this weird land. One night when he came back to his chamber he found Dantan and Trar awaiting him there. There was a curious hardness in Dantan's attitude, a somber sobriety in Trar's carriage. "Have you sought the Hall of Women since the battle?" demanded the son of the Ancient Ones abruptly. "No," retorted Garin shortly. "Did Dantan accuse him of double-dealing?" "Have you sent a message to Thrala?" Garin held back his rising temper. "I have not ventured where I cannot." Dantan nodded to Trar as if his suspicions had been confirmed. "You see how it stands, Trar." Trar shook his head slowly. "But never has the summoning been at fault." "You forget," Dantan reminded him sharply. "It was once, and the penalty was exacted. So shall it be again." Garin looked from one to the other, confused. Dantan seemed possessed of a certain ruthless anger, but Trar was manifestly unhappy. "It must come after council, the daughter willing," the Lord of the Folk said. Dantan strode toward the door. "Thrala is not to know. Assemble the council tonight. Meanwhile see that he jerked his thumb toward Garin, "does not leave this room." Thus Garin became a prisoner under the guard of the Folk, unable to discover of what Dantan accused him, or how he had aroused the hatred of the Cavern ruler. Unless Dantan's jealousy had been aroused and he was determined to rid himself of a rival. Believing this, the flyer went willingly to the chamber where the judges waited. Dantan sat at the head of a long table, Trar at his right hand, and lesser nobles of the Folk beyond. "You know the charge." Dantan's words were tipped with venom as Garin came to stand before him. "Out of his own mouth has this outlander condemned himself. Therefore I ask that you decree for him the fate of that outlander of the second calling who rebelled against the summoning." "The outlander has admitted his fault?" questioned one of the Folk. Trar inclined his head sadly. "He did." As Garin opened his mouth to demand a stating of the charge against him, Dantan spoke again. "What say you, lords?" For a long moment they sat in silence, and then they bobbed their lizard heads in assent. "Do as you desire, Dweller in the Light." Dantan smiled without mirth. "Look, Outlander." He passed his hand over the glass of the seeing mirror set in the tabletop. "This is the fate of him who rebels." In the shining surface Garin saw pictured a break in Tav's wall. At its foot stood a group of men of the Ancient Ones, and in their midst struggled a prisoner. They were forcing him to climb the crater wall. Garin watched him reach the lip and crawl over, to stagger across the steaming rock, dodging the scalding vapor of hot springs, until he pitched face down in the slimy mud. Such was his ending, and so will you end. The calm brutality of that statement aroused Garin's anger. "Rather would I die that way than linger in this den," he cried hotly. "You, who owe your life to me, would send me to such a death without even telling me of what I am accused. Little is there to choose between you and Kepta after all, except that he was an open enemy." Dantan sprang to his feet, but Trar caught his arm. "He speaks fairly. Ask him why he will not fulfill the summoning." While Dantan hesitated, Garin leaned across the table, flinging his words, weapon-like, straight into that cold face. "I'll admit that I love Thrala, have loved her since that moment when I saw her on the steps of the Morgel pit in the caves. Since when has it become a crime to love that which may not be yours if you do not try to take it?" Trar released Dantan, his golden eyes gleaming. "If you love her, claim her. It is your right." "Do I not know," Garin turned to him, "that she is Dantan's? Thran had no idea of Dantan's survival when he laid his will upon her. Shall I stoop to holding her to an unwelcome bargain? Let her go to the one she loves." Dantan's face was livid, and his hands, resting on the table, trembled. One by one the lords of the Folk slipped away, leaving the two face to face. "And I thought to order you to your death." Dantan's whisper was husky as it emerged between dry lips. "Garin, we thought you knew, and knowing had refused her." "Knew what?" "That I am Thran's son, and Thrala's brother." The floor swung beneath Garin's unsteady feet. Dantan's hands were warm on his shoulders. "I am a fool," said the American slowly. Dantan smiled. "A very honorable fool. Now get you to Thrala, who deserves to hear the full of this tangle." So it was that with Dantan by his side, Garin walked for the second time down that hallway, to pass the golden curtains and stand in the presence of the Daughter. She came straight from her cushions to his arms when she read what was in his face. They needed no words. And in that hour began Garin's life in Tav. End of Part 2 of The People of the Crater by Andre Norton.